If I could ask everyone to take your seats, we will start our program. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Rhonda Damasio, and I am the Executive Director here at Morven Museum and Garden. And on behalf of the board and staff, we would like to welcome you to the 7th Annual Grand Homes and Gardens Speaker Series at Morven. This is called The Quality of Doing, Mid-Century Modern Grand Homes and Gardens. And from what I hear from other folks, I think this is our most popular Grand Homes and Gardens. So thank you. And just a shout out to those who are watching us from at home and for all of you who came here tonight. Thank you so much. The mid-century modern movement continues to shape the aesthetics of today through architecture, furniture, interior design, and gardening. Mid-century modern homes are particularly sought after because of their thoughtful, sensible design approach characterized by clean and simple lines, honest use of materials, and a lack of embellishment. At its core, the movement is the story of people, the artists, designers, and architects who took chances to experiment with form in the post-World War II era societal change. As renowned designer and architect Charles Ames is often quoted, art resides in the quality of doing. Process is not magic. Tonight, we'll begin our series in Pennsylvania with the Toby and Stephen Korman House, considered to be one of the architect Louis Kahn's residential masterpieces. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight's series and give them a chance to just say a few words. At this time, I'd like to invite Brian Taylor, our 2025 series sponsor from the Bryn Mawr Trust, to share some words.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Rhonda said, my name is Brian Taylor. I'm the Wealth Director for Bryn Mawr Trust, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Morven Grand Home and Gardens series. It's a celebration of design, innovation, and artistry of the mid-century modern architecture. This is our second year sponsoring this wonderful series, and we're so grateful to be a part of it, this series once again. As we gather here in this historic setting of Morven Museum and Gardens, I'm reminded of the profound relationship between architecture and the spaces we inhabit. Mid-century modern homes, in particular, hold a special place in our hearts. As Rhonda mentioned, with their clean lines, open spaces, and harmony with nature, they exemplify timeless design, and they continue to inspire us today. At Bryn Mawr Trust, we understand the importance of preserving legacies, whether it be the legacy of great architecture, like we're going to talk about this evening, or the legacy of financial stability. For over 130 years, we've been honored to help individuals, families, and communities protect what they cherish the most. But this series is not just about the homes. It's about how we interact with the spaces that shape our daily lives and reflect our values. Mid-century modern homes remind us that simplicity, functionality, and beauty can coexist, much like our approach with our Bryn Mawr Trust clients. Again, we're honored to support the series and be with you here tonight. I'd like to wish a heartfelt thank you to Rhonda, Greer, and the entire Morven staff for creating this incredible opportunity to explore and appreciate such timeless designs. Please enjoy the program and the stories and the inspiration these homes have to offer. Thank you again, and enjoy this special series.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to your colleagues who have joined us here this evening. Now I'd like to welcome Kahn Syed from Capital Health, tonight's program sponsor, to say a few words.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kahn Syed. I'm Director of Management Engineering at Capital Health. It's my pleasure to be here as representing Capital Health as region's leader in providing quality and progressive care. Many of you probably are familiar with our campuses in Trenton, which is actually one of our old campuses there. Probably the old building still is in the middle of all the other buildings that are surrounding it, and our Hopewell campus in Pennington. So as part of our mission and vision and our values, we keep the connections with community and try to support all the events that happen in the communities that we support. So it's great to be here tonight supporting this great work that this museum is doing, all the valuable work that they are doing for the community. And I hope that you enjoy this event. Thank you.
Thank you again to our amazing sponsors. We wouldn't be who have been able to make this evening possible, the whole series possible. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a few housekeeping notes. Don't worry, they're not long. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the talk. My colleague Greer will rove around with a microphone and questions, and use the microphone, to call on folks. I will also be on the laptop and be able to ask questions for people who are virtual. And then a recording of this program will be shared with all the registrants via email a few days following the event. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, William Whitaker. William Whitaker is the Director and Chief Curator of the Architectural Archives of the University of Pennsylvania's Stuart Weitzman School of Design. He is co-author with George Marcus of The House of Louis Kahn and Uncreating the Japanese House, Yunzo Yoshimura, Antonin and Naomi Raymond, and George Nakashima. Trained as an architect at Penn and the University of Mexico, Whitaker works closely with the archival collections of Louis Kahn, Lawrence Halprin, and the partnership of Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown in support of teaching scholarship, preservation, and public engagement. He has co-curated over 40 exhibitions, including the Ann Ting Inhabiting Geometry, Graham Foundation, and Penn's ICA, and Design with Nature, now with the McCarg Center, a major program of exhibitions, conference, and public programs that highlight the dynamic and visionary approaches to landscape design and development in the face of climate change and global urbanization. Most recently, he served as project director for the What Minerva Built, an exhibition and book project charting the life and work of America's first independent female architect, Minerva Parker Nichols. So let's welcome Bill Whitaker. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is an amazing room, and I've lectured for Morven before, and I was just reminded of the fact that I did it over Zoom in 2020, and I thought I had lectured in the house before. I had seen the, anyway. So I convinced myself I had seen this site under construction when I probably visited the exhibit. This was the Jersey Homesteads exhibit a few years back. But really a beautiful space and a beautiful occasion, and really nice to see such a wonderful turnout for architecture. So can I just ask, are there architects in the room? Any architects in the room? Okay, there's a couple, good. All right, I'll put my hand up too. How many of you have actually spent any time in an archive? A couple? Okay. What's that? Where? Oh, just any archive. Any archive. Okay. All right, so I have to ask, just given the theme, do you live in a grand house? Okay, so cool. My wife and I live in a 1,200 square foot mid-century modern house with a roof that goes like that. I swear it doesn't leak, but it is just such an exciting part of our lives to have a house with a lot of glass, with a different way of looking at the world around. Okay? And so this is what you think, if you've not been to an archive, this is what you think an archive is, right? Okay. This is what our archive looks like. And so the Architectural Archives at Penn is part of a school. We're not part of a library, although we're in a library building. And so we're using the collections to talk to students about creativity, about thinking, about how you develop an idea that starts out as something invisible, an idea in your mind, and how you develop that into tangible form that then is part of people's lives. And just the interaction between the tools of design, the stuff that's made, drawings, sketchbooks, models, and so on, and how you can open people's minds about what design is all about, what makes a place good, or more importantly, what makes it really good. And so these are all parts of my day job. So I think I've got a pretty cool day job. This is my night job, I guess. And those conversations that happen are really about looking at the past, but also thinking about the future of what places can be and how they relate to us as human beings. So this is just examples of tours that happen in the archives. And I always look for those moments where some kid leans their head over and is looking at something in front of them saying, what is going on here? And I have to say, I'm an architect. I trained at Penn and I trained at University of New Mexico, but I worked in the archives as a student. And just looking at the things that you see in an archive and the way that people were thinking about things, drawing things, just opened doors endlessly. So really, all I'm doing is bringing that sense of spirit that I experienced as a student into the lives of students today. And I'm just showing you a series of images of what that looks like. Okay? These can be big groups, and so we got big tables in the room, and a 13-foot table, two of them, really kind of give you some room to spread things out. And imagine coming to an archive like the one we have at Penn, looking at the drawings that were part of creating a place in the world, and then go out to a place in the world, right? And to give students that direct connection. We also obviously see groups that are not just students from Penn. We see students from around the world. There's a group that comes from Greece every year, which is some of the most fun people you could ever imagine. And I feel it's an important part of the work that we do to connect with audiences outside of academia to also extend this sort of conversation about what makes architecture tick. So much of what I do really is about getting into the mind of the architects and the space in which things are shaped, the conversations that happen in those spaces. And this is just to show you, I really came to know the Korman House through taking student groups there. And this is a group that came for the better part of a decade from Virginia Tech University. And it just gave the opportunity to take students out to a great work of architecture, to tour around it, to be probably one of the primary people telling them what they're seeing, and then getting to know the owners of these places. So they're standing on the right-hand side is Larry Korman, who's the son of Steve and Toby Korman. And really, he and I have had an incredible journey together, figuring out what makes this house tick. He, from having grown up in the house, having actually met Lou Kahn, I never met Lou Kahn. He taking on the stewardship of this house and really wanting to do right by it as a real important work of architectural heritage of the 20th century. And you're seeing the house at a state where he's trying really hard to keep it perfect. But it's a moment where we were learning so much more about what Kahn's thinking was about the house. Okay, so I'm going to unpack that for you today in this talk. So but that idea of getting into the mind of an architect and by looking at objects closely, you come to the archives, we would do that through drawings. And I can certainly do a talk like this one where we just dive into drawings, but I was really taken with the idea of grand houses and gardens. So I was like, I could only talk about the Korman House because in Kahn's mind, this is a house that was modern only in its sense of space. So there's an incredible connection to history that's part of this house, to examples of great country houses in the past. It's a 6,500 square foot house, so it's not small. It's on a very sizable piece of property. But to actually walk you through is part of what I'm going to do today and then reflect on it. And so we will explore Kahn's thinking in that context. And here is just one of my favorite photos of Lou Kahn. Here he is on a boat going down the Grand Canal in Venice. And how lucky any architect is to be commissioned to do a work of art or work of architecture in Venice. He was commissioned to do a large Palazzo dei Congressi in the late 60s, a project not built, but just, it's a city that shows that you can do things entirely differently than most cities and make a great work of it. But how a creative person responds to those possibilities and opportunities. So in the context of the work I do, you're also getting into the spaces where the work is happening and you see people there. When you go into an architect's office, you can imagine there's drafting tables. I mean, there's computers there now, but there's all sorts of people there. And so architecture, unlike art or sculpture or photography, which in general are the work of a single individual, architecture involves so many people. It's not just an individual, although there might be a strong central force and creative force at the center of things. It's contingent on so many things, and there's so many things that compress and pressurize the creative environment where architecture is made. Laws governing zoning, budgets, the capabilities of the people who are hired, all of those things squeeze in. That's part of the storytelling that one gets into. But in visualizing that space, there's individuals who maybe you can't see in the history books. So one, in this case, is Harriet Pattison, who's a landscape architect who played an incredibly important role in a number of works by Luke Kahn, the Kimball Art Museum, which I'll show you a little bit about, but with the Korman House. And then being in that environment, you're also recognizing the clients and the way in which the architect and the team that's involved in the design are engaging with these people who say, we want to live in something interesting and engaging. How can we do that? So here are Steve and Toby Korman. These are photos from about 1971, around the time that the commission came in for the house. Steve's sister, Lynn Honigman, also commissioned Kahn to design a house. I'm not going to show you that tonight because that house wasn't built. The Kormans got their house built. That's a huge accomplishment in and of itself. And also just the idea that there's a family there. The Kormans had 3 sons. And this is a place where they grew up. So that conversation that goes on between the architect channeling those aspirations, the ideas about how you might want to live your life in the world, and then just following that progression from, an image like this that just shows a wonderful house just standing stark in the middle of what is essentially it's like horse country in the suburbs of Philadelphia. This is Fort Washington, just a little bit north of Chestnut Hill. And so this is a place where there's kind of open fields, and they're giving over to other things at this point in time. But just seeing this house emerge and then imagining it as an architect, as a landscape architect, 20 years later, 30 years later, with a mature landscape around it, and how really this is an idea of a country house. So I was asking, do you live in a big house? Do you live in a grand house? Most of us live in spaces that are urban or suburban. They don't have this sense of scale that goes with a country house. This is a great example with Kahn of thinking that through. And just like this is a delightful photograph because here are the trees, and I'm going to walk you through this landscape in a moment, and this is when they're just planted. So there's qualities in architecture and landscape that might take a generation to see mature. There's ideas that occur in the design process that take a while to reveal themselves to the people who inhabit the buildings. And then in the question of stewardship over longer periods of time, how you tend to these places, how you care for them, and how you respond to them into the future. Okay, so I want to do a walkthrough of the house and just really give you an introduction to its character. So the Korman family, there's 3 generations of builders. They might be in a 4th generation at this point in time. And they came to America around the same time that Louis Kahn did, the first decade of the 20th century. Emigres from Eastern Europe, Jewish families who arrive in a part of Philadelphia. The Kormans got out of there pretty quickly and were beginning to be very successful in the building of Northeast Philadelphia, doing these kind of endless row houses, but building up from there to all sorts of real estate investments. But they had an idea of building a suburban estate in Fort Washington and were denied the permit to move forward. So they decided to make this a family compound. So on that, the 5 grandchildren of the original Korman, Hyman Korman, each got a substantial 4 or 5 acre plot, and 3 out of the 5 built, okay? This is what that site looks like today from the air. This is just a Google view, and if I point, the Korman House is right here. And there's this large estate called Caramore, and you can get wine from Caramore. And there's a wonderful, let me just get myself oriented. There's a wonderful drive that comes up from Sheaf Lane. So you've got a long approach to the house. And this is what the approach looks like as you begin it. So, the post and rail fence, it really reminiscent of the horse country in the area. So you really have a sense of the history of some of the great estates from the turn of the 20th century, particularly in the early 1920s to the 1930s, where you get these houses that are grand, but they're also very modest in a way in their character. So just driving along, you get that sense of the landscape in the field. And as you get close to the house, you're kind of snuggled in between this wonderful grove of pine trees, which you saw in those tiny forms, right? On one side, and then dogwoods and flowering trees on the other, but you kind of get nestled in and directed through this simple curvilinear approach. This is all work that was conceived of between Lou Kahn and Harriet Pattison. And just moving a little closer, you can't see the house yet. The house is, presenting, you're seeing the landscape first, and this is kind of preparing you for that. I just, couldn't resist stamping into the trees and just getting a sense of what that landscape looks like, what it feels like. It's obviously providing some privacy to a swimming pool or tennis courts. It's screening certain aspects of a large house like this. But it's also really fundamentally about the approach to the house. So kind of bringing you back to that edge, back in, and then for that first view of the house. Okay? This is not approaching a house with a portico with great columns or the way in which you might approach Morven, where it's very frontal. The house kind of reveals itself as a whole. This is kind of like a great animal kind of crouching to make itself look smaller, to put in front, maybe a more modest front to the experience, not grabbing your attention, maybe striking a careful balance between architecture and landscape in that way. So I want to point out, and I've got a few plans here to help describe that, but just the idea that you've got that approach, and PowerPoint doesn't let me bend the line, but you've got that kind of twisting, and then you kind of hit something that kind of slows you down. And then that first view, you get this extraordinary little element here where you can see a world beyond. And this is a photo where there were some additional spruce trees here. So there was a thicker wood there that needed some remediation and replanting. So in the years ahead, that will mature again. You get a little glimpse of the world beyond, but just only if you're really looking carefully. So just taking that idea a little farther, you just see how you get this kind of diagonal through this little element. And my reflection part is really reflecting on this one element within the house. So moving a little closer, the house starts to reveal itself. And the first image of the Korman House I showed you with that kind of orange color was the kind of battle that Larry was fighting with the house to kind of maintain it. And really what Kahn had intended was for the wood to weather in the way that we, in driving through a rural landscape, might see an old barn, might see an old building, and think about that wonderful gray, silvery quality against the green of the landscape. More subtle note, how did that bright orange happen? Well, the products that you get to maintain a conventional suburban house usually have iron in it, which when you use stain on wood, that's the preservative. It's a great sunscreen for wood. And you need to protect the wood. You want it to last a long time. With cypress wood, which the exterior of this house is made out of, that has great rot resistance. It's a soft wood, but you don't want, that's not an easy wood to replace, right? So getting the house to silver properly and understanding that that's something fundamental to the character or the experience that Kahn is projecting, the experience that Harriet Pattison is imagining and conceiving of the landscape. So as you come up to the house, this close connection between architecture and landscape, and just seeing a little bit of the massing of the house, the different elements of the house, the shapes, the shadows as you approach, but more closed in space, more open space, and just another shot of the house as an orange, just to give you a sense. This came out of a great sense of wanting to be a great steward of the house, wanting to protect it, using the products that were available, and then understanding you had to unpack that and reverse it. But this element right here has always been something that really fascinates me, and it kind of is at the core of what makes this house special. It's the family dining table. It's the thing that as you approach a fine, let's call it a grand house, what has the architect chosen to put front and center? The family sitting at the dining table. This is not the formal dining area. The kitchen is visible in there. If you look in here, you can see the kitchen counters. So the kind of, way of kind of giving a very informal sense of entry to this house is quite lovely. All right, so if you pull up to the house and you get dropped off, there's a turnaround here. There's kind of a planting area where you could have a bosque of trees that kind of provides a screening from the primary parking area. And I'm just giving you a little bit of color here. That yellow is that kind of wonderful family dining area. And the idea that you are arriving, you might step out onto a brick apron, and then you have this cross axis that enters the house. So, often when I have the students in the archives, just, pointing out to them when architects are making a choice. They're maybe putting one kind of pencil down and picking up another. They're making a different kind of drawing. Those are all entry points into, the creativity of what architects are doing and landscape architects are doing. So when you ask someone to change the direction in which they're moving, you're maybe asking them to see things and look at things differently. So this is that point at which you turn into the house, and you are invited into the house with this wonderful brick path. It's very, you get this rather blank wall with some windows on either side and this kind of deep inset entrance as you move in. And so if I diagram that out a little bit more, and hopefully you can see that, okay? I've just indicated that idea of the direct access into the house. So you're turning from the main path of progression, you get that view to this grander landscape, and then you're going to turn and something's going to be revealed to you. This all happens in the context of a great kind of stair hall, and one of the kind of primary elements within the tradition of the American country house, the shingle style houses that they kind of developed in the 1880s, 1890s, is you moved into this multi-purpose space where there was a fireplace, there was a staircase, people could come together, there might have been a great fireplace in that space, but you're given a sense of arrival that is part of the sense of invitation. And at the center is a really magnificent staircase made of large timber elements and features. And here's that space as you kind of step back and take a look at it as an independent element. So then when you turn and you make another 90-degree element, you're kind of, the view in front of you, you have this kind of mysterious kind of cabinet on one side that you can see in the paneling, but there's a door there, and that you see that there's a pathway moving forth. And so you're kind of drawn forth, and the kind of full majesty of the landscape is revealed. And I'm sorry, this is, I needed the right image, and this is one I had to scan out of a book. So that's why it's got the gutter in the middle, so forgive me. But that, kind of piano at the middle of things, and then revealing this larger landscape beyond, which is facing to the northeast. So the light that comes through these windows is the morning light. Those stairs which come down from the bedroom, and as you walk out, you're getting the gentle light of the morning through these wonderful windows as you, progress to the kitchen, and you're going to sit down for breakfast in that wonderful family dining area. So let me return to the plan and just give you a sense. You saw the kind of, it's got a flat roof. It's got some interesting kind of geometrical quality, massing to the exterior of the building. And that's kind of explained in the different functions that you see. So these amber kind of colors are bedrooms. There's bathrooms that kind of hang like saddlebags on either side of the house. In the middle are closets. That central space, the central hall, these spaces are staircases, vertical circulation. So that kind of hidden box that kind of blocks your view kind of hides a secret staircase. So there's a little kind of playful sensibility at the center of the house. You come out into that grand space and you have another cross axis, and there's spaces for service. The three chimneys kind of form a really important aspect of the character of the house. There's a playroom on this side with another set of bathrooms and a way out to go to the swimming pool. So in this case, the bathroom serves as a kind of changing room, the kitchen, and then the garage area and a laundry area. Okay. But then stepping back and looking at that space from one of the corners, you've walked into a double height space. You have this generosity of light coming from the northeast. So it's not the strong light of the day. You get a wonderful window, which is facing northwest, and you get a chimney there. So the play of light that happens at the end of the day, the sunset, the way that light can reveal itself at the end of the day in its golden color, it's the vibrant reds that happen, can play off of that chimney and the reflections on the glass at the end of the day. And of course, in the landscape beyond. Looking a little bit more closely, you see that that room is divided in two. On one end is the formal dining area, and the other side is the living area. And then that cross axis that kind of connects one end to the other, kind of moving from the formal dining area into that living space, and seeing the way in which you get this grand sense of space, which is really this wonderful container of light. There's no big windows up top here because now you're facing south. If you have big windows there and you have south-facing windows, you're going to get a lot of light streaming in. It's going to be too bright. It's going to be severe on the eyes. So you can see how he's tucked it in a depth of volume on the south side, providing a sense of shade, some mitigation to the severity of the light on that side. And you also get this wonderful room within a room, this little ingle nook, which is really such a wonderful part of kind of grand or American country houses. This kind of cozy space where you can go and you can retreat into. And on this side, a little window that provides you a view out from a study area. So you get these spaces within spaces that relate to each other. And here's a nice winter view of that space. And so just having the ability to see the kind of dynamic forces of nature, the changing light quality, how the seasons reveal themselves and are brought into focus through architecture, but also obviously with a knowledge and a consideration of the quality of the landscape. So here's a close-up of that ingle nook with just a little seating area in brick and then a little seating area in wood. And just so beautifully proportioned and so carefully built. The story goes is that during construction, this chimney had to be built 3 times. The fireplace was because Kahn was not satisfied the first 2 times. This looks elegant. It looks, so gracious, but it's also demanded an incredible focus on construction and the care of construction. So rather than having typical home builders, you actually were getting contractors who knew how to build churches, knew about the quality expected in building sacred spaces and in paying attention to the level of detail expected in architecture. So Kahn was fortunate to be able to make contact with a contractor firm, Errol Fessmeyer. But just, the joy and beauty of a simple arch and these two speaking to one another as a sense of construction, coming around the corner, seeing a little niche where you could put sculpture or flowers. There's a little depth that's provided in that. And then moving closely and looking at the brick themselves, the choices you make in material, bricks are infinitely variable. They're ancient in their character. They've been a building material in architecture for thousands of years, and that they can show the process of their making. So looking at the surface quality, you're seeing the effects of how the bricks were fired and made. The imperfections in Kahn's mind are perfect because when sunlight hits that material, it reveals itself in interesting ways. The subtleties of the surface of the brick provide variegation in the quality of light. And I would add, you see the way that the mortar joints have a line struck in them, okay? That's a great place for a shadow to reveal itself. It's also one of the oldest brick joints used. It's a grapevine joint, and it was used in most of the buildings and Old City, Philadelphia, Independence Hall included, because when you made bricks back then, they weren't machine made, they were handmade, so they were not all the exact same size. One of the economies of brick is that they're supposed to be all the same size and you can be very predictable. Back then, they're not all the same size. So the grapevine joint was a way for a mason to strike a line, to kind of focus the eye on that line, rather than the irregularities of the brick sizes. That's also a human hand at work. So the way that line happens is never perfect. So that little subtlety of variation is really quite dynamic and engaging. And again, the subtlety of providing places where variegation of light, the quality of light, the character of shadow changes is really at the core of Kahn's work. So if at this moment we step outside and we look at the house from the south side, you get a sense of the depth of the facade on this side. There are some larger windows. You get that the bathrooms or the kind of servant areas, as Kahn might call it, hanging with their blank walls on this side. Larger windows into bedrooms here, the study here, the master, the primary suite up top with a balcony, and you get these two of the three wonderful chimneys. They're all the same height, but each of the three are a different shape. None of them are exactly alike. And in certain ways, one is higher here, it steps down, and the one around the corner, which you'll see in a moment, it's kind of a way of pressing the house down into that landscape visually. So you come back and you step back and you look at it from a distance, and you get this sense of this light-filled box on the end side of, in the landscape standing. You see this third chimney where you're in the kitchen area, and it's a little bit lower than this. It changes its shape. That's kind of being expressive of the different functions within the house, the different distribution of elements within the house. And so just to return to the plan for a moment, those three chimneys marked off in red, okay? So let me go back for a second. But that element where you see this using tongue and groove oak extending vertically in the house. So that's reminding you there's something different going on there. So stepping into the house and recognizing, well, there's this hidden stair connecting the study with the master suite, the primary suite. So you get this wonderful hidden staircase that cycles around and takes you up to the primary suite, which has a fireplace on the second level. And if you turn and look the other direction, you get this wonderful bank of closets. It was important to have lots of closets in the house. But I will tell you, this looks like it's regular in its interval. It's actually quite variable. But visually, you don't notice that because of the strong perspective. And there's a window here that overlooks the entry. So if you're getting ready for your visitors to come and you're getting dressed and you can see people arriving, so you can rush downstairs and you've got a hidden way to rush downstairs. Okay, so here's the plan on the upper level, the primary suite, the kind of bed area. There's a study, a little built-in desk here, two of them actually. The dressing area with closets on either side, his and hers bathroom, that staircase, the closets along here. 4 bedrooms. Korman's had 3 boys. Their closets, the bathrooms on either side, and this wonderful space that really, it's not a hallway. It's a stair hall. You get this generosity and sense of space where the Korman boys talked about kind of throwing footballs across this space, as just part of the dynamics of living in this house. But just the use of oak, the use of structural fir, the wonderful detailing of the stair rails. These are all things that you would see in a Tudor or Jacobean English country house, but the shapes are Kahn's. The spirit might be channeling these older character of houses, but the sense of space is connecting us with the modern world and modern life. So coming back downstairs into the stair hall and then moving to that kitchen area. So here's the dining area and getting a sense of how sunlight moves within that space and the kind of reflections that happen off that chimney that is just set close to the window, but separate from the window. So, I mean, there's artists working in the 1950s and 60s. I'm thinking of Barnett Newman in particular, where his paintings are just about light and just about the changing quality of light. Perhaps one could imagine a conversation between Barnett Newman and Kahn sitting in the dining area here. Moving into the kitchen, there's the brick. There's that brick that we saw as you entered the house. We saw it in one other place, that area that you step out on the south side onto the terrace. We saw a brick on that side. So you're actually kind of within the volume of a chimney. It's kind of like another inglenook, another house within the house. And then turning and walking and seeing that family dining area as it was initially furnished and as it is today, okay? With its wonderful brick inside and outside. And then taking us back to this photo. So one thing I'll tell you, and the second part of the talk is just kind of reflecting on some of the qualities, and in particular, this very special space within the house and its character. One thing I'll add, one of the requests from the client, Stephen Korman in particular, he had horrible allergies. And so while you want to be close to the landscape, the house is actually quite closed in, and there's not a lot of operable windows, because he just he would drive himself crazy, and you're basically out in former horse country, so maybe hay fever was a problem, so that, what is this thing? And so let's think about that for a moment. And so let me talk a little bit about Kahn. So I haven't told you that much about Kahn. So Kahn is one of the, in a sense, the most significant architects of the second half of the 20th century, at a time when modernism, which had, kind of emerged in the late 1890s, and kind of came to fruition in the years between the wars, World War I and World War II, a sense of abstraction, a sense of moving on beyond the past, maybe taking radical steps in the era after World War I. You want to kind of rethink the world and how we go about doing things. The rapid change in technologies, in infrastructure changes, in the way we live, work, learn, all of those things, the possibilities of travel. These are profound changes, and architects were looking for ways of engaging with that. But by the 1950s and 60s, if I can encapsulate it in simple ways, the kind of glass and steel skyscraper, and that being an emblematic element of American architecture being kind of repeated everywhere in the world, was not so satisfying. So how we think about the sensitivities in place and location are important. The sense of craftsmanship and connecting with the past, finding in history things that still can be alive in the present, and how you bring that into contemporary architecture. So Kahn's born in 1901. He's born in Europe, in what's now Estonia. He, at age 5, comes as a young immigrant and arrives in Philadelphia. And some years ago, I was able to get my hands on his Philadelphia public school enrollment card. And in the first these are all the addresses in the first 10 years he lived in Philadelphia. You know what they call this? One step ahead of the rent man. The rent collector, I mean. And this is the area of Northern Liberties, Poplar Street and Marshall Street. This is the Jewish immigrant slum of Philadelphia. This is where they first wound up. And I think Hyman Korman was somewhere here when he first arrived, but quickly was able to move on. This is where Kahn went to school. Okay? But just basically all the houses are tightly fit. So I just want to show you, I looked for all of those addresses. I cannot find any photographic image in any collection in Philadelphia that shows us a house he lived in, which is to say, this is one of the oldest parts of Philadelphia. It was also probably one of the most derelict parts of Philadelphia, and that's why the poorest of the poor immigrants went to live there. We do have a really great set of photos taken on the time that Kahn was about 14 years old. This is a time where he's being able to really engage with art schools. And he's not thought about becoming an architect yet. He was gifted musically, gifted in terms of an artist. But this is Front Street in Philadelphia. And this sequence of images were taken to describe where they would be building the elevated transit line in Philadelphia. This is a really great photographer, by the way. I've forgotten the person's name, but they're really good. You can see there's all these little alleys that extend out. And here's one of those alleys, Olive Street, where you see little kids at play, the kind of scale of the street. You see the houses are quite small. Look, I mean, okay, so this is a bar. It's a corner bar. This is Poplar Street. So Kahn basically lived just up the street here a few blocks. The man just standing in the window and the kind of connection you have inside and out. Here you get a sense of that elevated as a piece of construction. Coming up to a major intersection, this is at Germantown Avenue. And then this is just one of my favorite shots that I ever found on the City Archives website, where you get advertisements for theater at the Forest Theater. You get this little troupe of kids. This is where Kahn grew up. This is his sense of domestic space. He never saw a grand house until later in life. These are the places he associated with family, with community, with that sense of space, and maybe wondering of the lives lived within the houses within. There's institutional buildings in this space representing different immigrant groups, different religions. Old against new. So those contrasts in a historic city are quite interesting. In places like Princeton and Philadelphia, we have a long history. Los Angeles, which in this lecture series you're going to be visiting, very different sense of character out there, and also very different sense of weather. You know, I've heard about Los Angeles that basically you can build anything as long as it'll stand up in an earthquake, because the weather is so, well, I guess fires now tell us that that's absolutely not true. So I eat my words there. But that sense of relating to the past and engaging with the past is something that you have to make a choice. And this is up at Girard Avenue. Okay? But this is the curb market that is very much a part of the area where Kahn grew up. This is the North Marshall Street curb market. And so these are where the shops are. This is where that sense of a community occurs. Okay? How does someone grow up in a place like this and become the architect he did? That's a story for another day, but I think I wanted to make sure that you saw that as a way to just think about what's going on in the Korman House, and maybe to reflect on why put the family dining area up front. In thinking about this talk, and I also, Amsterdam came to mind, and I could not find a good image of this, but when I was visiting Amsterdam a few years ago and just walking around that city, the way the windows relate to the street and the human experience walking on, there's canals there, so you do have to watch out for the bicyclists who fly by at dangerous breakneck speed, and they'll mow you down apparently. But the way in which the windows offer a glimpse into the world within, and it gives you a sense of community, a sense of welcome. And so, is that a bit of what we see at the Korman House? I also was wanting to think a little bit closer to home, so I was thinking about Bucks County, which I drove through, which is such a beautiful place, and the Nakashimas, Anton and Raymond, the wonderful work that they did and the lives that they created just over in New Hope, not far from here. So I was thinking about Edward Hicks, who's always a good person to think about when you think about American architecture or American art. And I just look at that side porch. Here's the formal entry, but placed next to it, it's just this kind of everyday space, this humble space, this utilitarian space. This is, great, 18th, late 17th, early 18th century Quaker architecture revealing itself. Here's another one of Hicks's paintings, and he's kind of leaving out the main entrance and showing you this kind of side entrance. Right? So this kind of sense of life and projecting a sense of life. These paintings were often portraits of farms and commissioned of Hicks to kind of show the kind of success of a family and the livestock, and to kind of picture and project those sorts of qualities. I could have done a whole talk just showing you the great country house tradition in Philadelphia and how it connects to the Korman House, but I wanted to take you through it as we might if we had all been able to visit there together. And here's one house by the great Philadelphia architectural firm Mellor, Meigs & Howe. And they are responsible for some of the most interesting country houses, but the ones where it presents a more modest front. So you can see how there's a drive that comes up, there's a forecourt. So as you approach the house, you actually drive by it before you kind of are given to a place where you drop off. And there's an auto court. So here is architecture responding to the new technologies of the automobile and dimensions and shapes and contours relating to that as a reality that's fundamental. But you kind of pass by the kind of glory of the landscape, and you can see the entrance is this very modest affair that you might see in the English countryside, in the Cotswolds, where a house built of stone, additions over time, and how the house kind of reveals itself in a series of rooms that reveal different qualities and vantage points into the landscape beyond. I'll point out that there's a porch here, but it's not something that is clearly or as clearly revealed. So you get the point. Is this just simply an enclosed porch? Is this an outdoor dining area that's been made indoor? Or is it that place where the kind of spirit of the family wanting to be able to welcome those that visit in an informal way? Like just, jump on the couch, here's some popcorn, we're going to watch a movie. So that having a grand house, but also revealing it as with a sense of modesty to it, with a sense of welcoming character to it. I also couldn't resist because of that image that I showed you of Amsterdam with the barge and the houseboat, showing you a design by Kahn. This is the American Wind Symphony Orchestra barge called Point Counterpoint 2. Okay, it was commissioned in the 60s, but it took a while to get funding for it. And so it wasn't actually built until after Kahn died. He died in 1974, just a few months after the Korman House was first occupied. And this was built with funding for the bicentennial. It was the city of Pittsburgh's, exhibition for the American bicentennial in 1976. And this is taking a boat, putting a young orchestra on it with an art gallery and floating it along America's waterways. Okay, that is about the coolest idea ever. And that's what it looks like when it parks on a waterfront. You have a sense of community arriving for a performance. But of course, this strange vessel arrives at humble ports along the Monongahela or the Ohio rivers, or in this case, this is actually in Finland. So it was brought over on a container ship and it did a tour of the waterways of Europe. But drawings like this, where you can see Kahn drawing a rendering, presenting this idea, and these big openings that remind us of portholes, but they're much larger than any porthole that you might associate with. And this is the front porch. And what Kahn recognized is when the boat is sitting there, people are going to be curious about it. There's young people who are part of the orchestras. And the whole idea behind it, without going too far into it, there's places like Tanglewood where established performers are able to go play in the summer. Younger people are able to integrate in that, but how you might offer more opportunities was the genesis behind the American Wind Symphony Orchestra. It started in the 1950s with funding from John Hines that put it on an old coal barge, and it went along the American waterways without its own power. This ship provided the power, so it's a powered vessel, which made it much easier, right? But that idea of having a front porch and the idea of the community wanting to come up with their own curiosity and having people who are great musicians who may not have been to these simple places, this American landscape, and visiting those places and bringing this level of art to those places really quite magical, right? And in the hull of the ship is an art gallery, so that you were also providing people other ways onto the ship. But this idea of a front porch, this idea of a portico. So here are a couple of travel sketches by Kahn. This is from 1928-29. So he's an architect. He's trained and graduates from the University of Pennsylvania in 1924. It's a great time to be an architect. There's lots of work. He works on the sesquicentennial, this great fair that happened in Philadelphia in 1926. We're about to have another one of those. I don't know how to say what 250th anniversary is. But he saves up some money and he's able to take a great trip because as an architect trained in the classical tradition, seeing the ancient world is important. He's fascinated in this trip by the modest vernacular that you find on the Italian coastline, here along the Amalfi Coast, these simple fishermen huts, these simple fishermen houses that are age-old. This is a group of houses on Capri. So then I come back to this and I think about just the kind of variegation of the facade. If I go back for a second, there's stairs here, there's openings, there's these funny windows that start to create a sense of community on the outside of the building. And while this is a great country house, you don't have, this is not a public space that's out in front. I guess that's telling me to hurry up. Damn. I'm almost done. That sense of adventure that comes out of creating this composition with a knowledge of these kind of most humble of structures. And then the Kimball Art Museum with these incredible porticos. There's not a more beautiful art museum, I think, in the world. So it is worth the agony of flying to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, renting a car, driving the 45. It's conveniently located between Dallas and Fort Worth, so you're already halfway there. And drive to Fort Worth and go see this building where what I described in the character of light that moves through, the gentle balance between architecture and landscape. They're not fighting each other, they're really working together. And the combination of those two things together is really pretty magical in elevating architecture and our experience thereof, right? It doesn't always have to be a park-like setting. Architects can be very sensitive in urban landscapes too. But since we're talking about kind of great houses, and in this case, country houses, these porticos, Kahn said of them, what's so wonderful about them is they're so unnecessary. They're not part of the program. They're not required by the client. And yet this is the place that kind of creates a sense of invitation. It invites you to sit down, relax. The fountains here make a wonderful sound. There's some fairly busy streets in the area. Camp Bowie is a pretty busy street. So this tends to dull that, but all of the gravel you walk on, the scale of the trees, the big oaks that are behind us in this image, the way that light plays out there, all of these things are preparing you for the experience of the art within. And here's a drawing made by Harriet Pattison, who was so involved in the making of the landscape at the Korman House, describing the possibilities of the landscape at the Kimball, where the fountains might be, the entrance of the trees. So kind of creating the sense of spirit and preparing people for the experience of art. And on the inside, this is a concrete structure. The concrete is so beautifully made and carefully made. It's the highest technology of engineering, mind you, at the time. It's a 100-foot span. It's only 3.5 inches thick of concrete. It's got some cables in there that are doing some pretty extraordinary work in order to span that space. So you have this sense of modern space, but you're in a room with a vaulted ceiling above. It's not a conventional vault, it's called a cycloid, so it's got an unusual shape to it, but it is a shape defined by mathematics and geometry. And there's a slit at the top that brings natural light in, reflects it on those vaults, so that no direct sunlight hits the works of art, which curators love, conservators love, but it creates this sense and quality of light within. There's some garden spaces within the building as well. But do you guys know how you can go in big art museums and you immediately feel exhausted? You don't feel that way here. And so it's no surprise that in describing an art museum and describing its character, it should feel like a big house. So I had the opportunity to do a little work, install an exhibit, Lou Kahn, at the Kimball Art Museum about 6-7 years ago. And it was, midwinter. And so at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, at museums, you close promptly. So you can't burn the late midnight oil to finish an installation. They kick you out for security reasons, right? But still, it was in the winter. And so by 4:30, the light was changing. So, the quality of light was coming down. I mean, there were spotlights, so you could see the art, no problem. But the idea that you got this kind of feeling of being in a house, have you ever had that feeling of coming home and it's just dusk and you turn on a light and there's a feeling there, there's a warm feeling with that? So this kind of, this picture, which, these are only fleeting moments in architecture, but, this kind of twilight shot is always a pretty magical moment to capture architecture. But this kind of sense of invitation and being connected to the world around, being connected with the family, connected with the people who are coming to visit the space. These are all qualities in architecture that are enduring. They're things that make architecture, in our lives a significant thing. And when it's done right and when it's done really well, It's really an extraordinary thing. So I'd invite you guys all to come to the Korman House, but it's not really up to me. But I would say, visiting architecture firsthand, seeing great architecture and considering what makes it tick through your own body, through your own sensibilities is such an important thing. And so in the work that I do, I strive to help open up that sense of curiosity that I have with others. And so I hope what I've told you and what I've shared with you tonight, you've enjoyed, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And now we have time for questions.
Hi, just two quick questions. Did he want to be involved in the interior decoration, in the furniture, design and all that? And then the second question was, is it kind of a nightmare house in winter where it's cold and drafty, and in the summer absolutely boiling because of all that glass? Or was there a way that he offset that?
So first things first, what architect doesn't want to have total control over everything? That wasn't the case in the Korman House. Kahn worked on a house before this, the Fisher House, that's in Hatboro. He wanted to work with Doris Fisher, the client, and they actually went out a little bit and chose the furniture. Kahn was just too busy for that. Earlier houses, he designed some of the furniture with that. He had a sense of wanting to do that. And being that, I think he was really, where he grew up and the experiences he had growing up, seeing how other people lived was endlessly fascinating. And as an architect, all the kind of nuances that happen in a domestic space, there's a lot of subtlety happening there. And having a feeling for that from the human point of view of human experience is really interesting. So at the very least, having conversations about where furniture goes. In the drawings we have in the archives, and we have 36,000, a lot of those are the design studies. You'll see him working on a plan or even a section. Those are the kind of drawings that architects make, and he'll be putting the furniture in. He'll be imagining possibilities for somebody putting out a vase of flowers in an elevation and anticipating that. It's very intentional not to just reveal human scale. It's something more. So it's very much about part of his creative imagination, but he was not the fastest architect in getting his ideas down. He really carefully considered things, and he was a slow, what's fun about Kahn is he drew out his designs in an elongated process. So you can really see his deliberations, his conversations with others. So the second thing, a house with that much glass. Well, I did mention, Steve Korman not wanting to have operable windows. So really the only operable windows are in the bathrooms. There are doors that open to the outside. So the drafty quality is not an issue. It's also a house that's conceived of in 1970, 71, 72. You just get a big furnace, right? So some of the issues that we now are more concerned with energy efficiency and things like that, were less acute in that time frame. So, the energy efficiency question is a real one. But it is all double pane glass. You can make improvements with that. It started off as double pane glass. Some of his other houses are single. But he worked with really great engineers. So I'm saying like the heating, ventilation, and cooling engineers. So the same guys that probably worked on the Kimball Art Museum did the system for the Korman. So it's sized properly. Because there's nothing worse than sitting in front of a great glorious window in wintertime and having that cold draft going down your neck, right? I don't think that happens. Yeah. Other questions?
Who owns it, and does anybody live in it today?
Okay. It's still within the family. So Larry Korman is the owner. So he's raised his family in the house. So that there's been 3 generations of the family. And actually the houses around are still within the Korman family. So it is very much a lived-in place. Although I have to say Larry's kids, they're all graduated college now, right? So, but he really took on the stewardship of that house because he remembered being with Kahn on the site. You guys saw some of the sculptures around. That's an artist, Robin Friedenthal. And, Larry remembers kind of deciding with Kahn where those might be sited within the landscape.
I'm just kind of curious about the other houses.
Yeah.
In the compound. Did they relate architecturally, or?
No, they're very, I mean, they're
completely
contemporary architects. One is Hugh Newell Jacobson, Washington DC based architect. And those houses, and then the other is Carl Massara, who's also a Philadelphia architect. But, the houses have, pitched roofs. They start to evoke, some of the volumes of early American architecture. But the walls are all white. They have that sense of abstraction. So they're very different in character from Kahn. I will say that the Honickman House, designed at the same time as the Korman House, very similar, it would have been very similar in character. The issue with the Honickman House is where Steve Korman and Toby Korman, they kept making the house smaller and making sure that they were able to build it, and they had to make some choices in order to make sure that they could build it. So, sheetrock rather than plaster, some things like that. The Honickman House kept getting bigger and bigger. So at some point, it became too expensive, right? And so it was never built. But we've got construction drawings, right? But I think there's a whole process that goes through with Kahn in a building, any structure. There's a lot of decisions that happen as you move through the construction process, which is not as common today. It's very difficult to do that today, but sometimes you can. But that improvising that can happen on site is actually quite important. There's things that even the most kind of visionary or skilled architect can't necessarily know all the things that are possible. And seeing things happen that change up is like, allows you as a young architect to relate to the idea that these guys who we recognize as greats, as people who really were able to do inspiring work and engaging work, had to really think it through, had to struggle it through and figure out things along the way. But the other houses, there's 9 that were built in the Philadelphia area. Kahn designed some 24 others. Some are more modest in their character of additions. He did houses in downtown Philadelphia, additions. He did some designs for houses in Washington, D.C., Tulsa, Oklahoma. None of those were built. It was really just this group around Philadelphia that were built, and that spans from one of his first independent commissions in 1942. Just got built, they got under construction just as World War II, at least the American involvement got started, and materials rationing started to happen on through to the Korman House, which is really the last building that Lou Kahn saw completed in his lifetime. They're recording it, so why don't we? Oh, can you hear it, or? Go for it.
I think I can project.
Go for it, that sounds great.
You previously referenced another structure they had worked on. You said Hatboro. Was that Hatboro, that village in Bucks County, Pennsylvania?
So I gave you some examples related to the Fisher House. So that's a house that was commissioned in 1960, and the Fishers moved in 1967. That's 7 years. And that's in Hatboro. Yeah. So the funny story with the Fishers is they commissioned Kahn to design their house just as he was hitting he peaked late in life. He really was in his 50s when he started to get these kind of world-class commissions, a world capital in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the art museums he was doing, medical laboratories, the Salk Institute of Biological Research out in La Jolla, an incredible site. The Fishers kind of got in there right as Kahn was getting internationally famous, and they had to wait. So it took 4 years to design and 3 years to build.
That's an interesting little village, so I'm
Yeah.
sure historically, if you go through the town, you'd be able to see that.
Well, across the way is an old farmhouse, and Kahn took care to choose the same building stone for the base. It's a wooden house it's on a stone plinth. Kahn had imagined using more stone in the design development. It was quite adventurous in its design development, just as the Korman House was. But he just wound up using the same stone as the house across the way. And now that quarry, which was still open in 1964, 65, has been filled in with trash. It's been leveled off, and there's a strip mall there.
What, if any, is the connection between the design of the landscaping and the house? did he or how did he think about landscape design and the plantings with the design of the house, just in terms of the entrance and the open landscape view?
So just recognizing that it's a country house and that recognizing that you have the time that it takes to approach the site, recognizing that you could decide to present the house as a frontal view where you drive up in a very formal way and choosing to do otherwise, recognizing the landscape and the potential for a matured landscape to shape human experience as you move along and to create a sense of surprise, dynamism, as you come around a curve, being presented with a view of something. There's drama, there's all sorts of things that one might associate with the theater that are possible within that realm. So working closely with a landscape architect from the get-go and looking at the great tradition of country houses in places like England, even in the arts and crafts era, and one can look to the Korman House and see certain aspects of the arts and crafts period that are being brought into the modern era, particularly the kind of use of wood, the care with which the brick, the inglenook, and so on. But the relationship in the arts and crafts between garden and house, and the kind of careful way in which you link those spaces through how you move through the house, the views that are presented to you. It's all kind of an incredibly integrated thing. And just like the pragmatic things of where you park the cars, and are there things that you see, right? The trees you choose. There are, you can think of certain trees as appropriate at the scale of an estate. And if you try to put a copper beech tree in a suburban lot, you're asking for trouble. But there's not a more beautiful tree than a copper beech in a great meadow where it can really spread itself out and reveal itself out. And it takes decades, if not the better part of a century, for a tree like that to really mature in its character. Architecture at this scale with that size of a landscape provides you those opportunities as a designer. And it should be said, Kahn probably did not know he could distinguish certain tree species, but it wasn't his thing to imagine, the refinement of choosing a certain tree because of its associations with government, or the way that a cedar of Lebanon has certain character to it. But a landscape architect might know those qualities and associations, and that might be a part of the storytelling that Kahn thinks as an aspect of human experience.
I understand Kahn was one of the architects who designed houses in Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if later in his career he designed any more modest houses.
Right. Okay. So the question, just to make sure you guys heard it, did Lou Kahn design houses in Roosevelt, New Jersey? Yes. It was Jersey Homesteads, 1935, 36, 37. He was the assistant principal architect and probably the coordinating intelligence behind all of those houses. He was working under an architect, Alfred Kastner, who had come from Europe. And that's a great, that's the Depression era. So there's a great body of work that's happening around housing and addressing the needs of people and in housing. So he was someone who began his career as an independent architect in the middle of the Depression, but very much as someone concerned with public housing. And at that scale, thinking about how just where you place the houses and how maybe adding, turning the houses 45 degrees against one another, you're creating little private spaces. So the kind of dignity of human experience, so that you're creating small private spaces within that. So the ingenuity that was shown and the economy that was demanded and expected in public housing carried forth into even his monumental works, because just because you can make something bigger or you can use finer materials does not make it any better, right? If you can do it with the most humble of means and modest of materials, even if it's, an art museum, that's good. Most of Kahn's houses are not 6,500 square feet. The Margaret Esherick house in Chestnut Hill is about 2,100 square feet. It's a house for a single woman, age 40 when she commissioned it. It's a one-bedroom house. It's compact. I would not say it was meant in the same way as you know, if you guys are coming for all 4 lectures, Elizabeth Smith is talking about the case study houses. Those are houses really, you know, envisioned to redefine American, how Americans live, right? And to address the question of the middle class house, to address the question and to bring architects' creativity into that realm in a more forceful way so that suburbia did not have to be a kind of cookie cutter sort of thing, that you could bring other qualities into it. You know, Kahn's houses, most of his clients were doctors, right? So there were people who could afford to commission a house. You know, but did he do, you know, modest commissions? You know, he did some monasteries, the Dominican Mother House, where the sisters, you know, they ultimately didn't build because the world, that world, the Catholic community of that, you know, was dramatically changed by 1970. He did public housing in the 1950s, like many architects. Not a lot of it survives. You know, much of it has been demolished, even though there was a certain humanity to it. The whole project, in a way, had an inhumanity to it. And the lack of maintenance and other things associated with that, those are all, you know, much of his public housing is gone. But he introduced ideas into the urban environment and into urban renewal of greenways, you know, places where you were providing a sense of humanity and green space. And while the spaces he created in public housing for Philadelphia are gone, you go to Society Hill in Philadelphia, it's got greenways that are part of the connective tissue, providing a way for people to circulate in the city separate from cars. And being in an old city of Philadelphia, which, you know, in its old city, there were no cars there in 1682. And it's always just like, it's a mind-blowing thing to recognize that Philadelphia, when it was first laid out in 1682, they planned for Market Street to be 100 feet wide. So you've got about 20 houses, and you've got the main street is meant for a world-class city. So there was already a sense of planning in the future that was there. But not, you know, truth be told, there's not so many modest houses for, like, you know, but he liked to design houses, and I will tell you, he probably lost money designing every one of them. Other questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk tonight. I love how you sort of, without hitting us over the head, you taught us how to look at things, and I really appreciate that. I am not an architect, but I love public places, and I love visiting parks and seeing how the landscape interacts. And I actually have really enjoyed Louis Kahn's 5 Freedoms Memorial or Monument in New York. And I was wondering if you can comment about that. I feel like the way we enter that now has that same sort of entering through and seeing trees and not being revealed until you get to the end of that. But I don't know if he had anything to do with the landscaping, since it was constructed after he had passed. So thank you again.
Sure. Well, the landscape architect that I mentioned, Harriet Pattison, was working closely on what then was the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. So that was commissioned 1970. Well, he started working on it in February of 1973. So the Korman House was under construction at the time that what became the Four Freedoms Park. And that's, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. And it was the state of New York deciding it needed, you know, it should have, you know, because he was governor of New York, and to have, you know, a great memorial to the president in New York City was important value. But you know, in that case, the kind of character defining quality that was was always a part of the design, that it's a garden in a room. There's nothing more simple than that. And that the way in which we experience monumentality, especially in the context of memorials, you guys must realize there's no formula for that, right? You could put a building up on a pedestal. You could give it great columns. There's qualities in art, in the art of architecture, and the combinations of landscape, sculpture, all those dimensions that evoke something in us, draw us in, make us feel something, right? Make us feel engaged, or, you know, perhaps bring you to tears. And how you affect that and you tap into that as an architect is a very challenging thing. And Kahn always, you know, recognized that. And that, you know, in the case of Four Freedoms, it's a memorial. So there's not really any function to it, right? But it's meant to be a moving place. So in that case, the idea that you arrive and you have a grove of trees, and you kind of are able to kind of settle people down because you've had to get there, you have to rush. There's all those, things that are stressors in life, but then once you arrive, you've got a shady spot, and then you approach, and then there's this kind of 100-foot wide steps that go up about 12 feet. And so you're confronted with this sense of monumentality, these steps, but where do they go? So it pulls you to the top of those steps. And then you're given the geometry of the site, which you're at the tip of an island. So the geometry, kind of forms a cone moving you in, and it focuses on a large monumental bust of Roosevelt's head, as if he's speaking to you, right? And it's kind of evoking that sense of connection to Roosevelt, as many Americans knew him from the radio, from the fireside chats. And on either side are allays of trees, gentle in their scale, meant to be kind of wild in their character. And how it was conveyed, it should give the feel of the wildness of the American continent, is the way that the landscape architect conveyed it, right? And Kahn was interested. I mean, allays of trees are things you see in war memorials all over Europe. There are allays of trees in many monumental landscapes. They're good. That works. It's good stuff. Gives you shady spots that you can retreat under. That converges on the room. And the room is an incredibly monumental space that they explored doing in concrete. And with these incredible, at first, what Kahn called baldacchinos. So these 18-foot cantilevers of concrete, which you could step under. There were different levels with steps. It was meant to be a place of inspired use. So there were not really lots of inscriptions and lots of stories. It was meant to invite you to engage with one another. And in arriving at that room, all of the different moves, architectural landscape, was meant to kind of allow you to let your guard down and kind of feel a sense of connection to maybe a common sense of humanity. And, right down the river is the United Nations. And, that connection with the Four Freedoms was very intentional. As built and as the design developed, let's use stone, because he was dealing with Avril Harriman, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. So it's like, we want to use stone. And so Kahn adapted his designs to the order of stone. And it's these massive 32-ton, 6-foot by 6-foot by 12-foot tall granite blocks. There was only 5 quarries in America that could supply granite at that scale. The blocks were just 2 tons too heavy to actually bring onto the island over the bridge. This is on Roosevelt Island in the middle of the East River. So it had to be barged to the site like the Egyptians, which maybe is appropriate, right? But they're not just laid together, there's 1-inch gap between them. So, it's like, are they walls or are they columns? They're in the state of in between. You have a 6-foot depth in order to get that precision, and every one is exactly 1 inch apart. These are not easy things to build that way. They had to hone and polish the granite in the middle so that you could get that level of precision, because you're cutting something that thick with a wire saw. That's how they cut stone. The wire actually gets thinner as you go down. So it's not precise. And so it kind of would have the effect of doing that. So you have to polish it to get it, truly square, to square it up. But on the outside, he left the wire sawn. And what's that? It's like the bricks. It's like the grapevine joint. Those subtle irregularities of the marks of the saw revealing itself on the granite are places where sunlight can touch in very dynamic ways. And those subtleties are quite magical. And so, but to return to that idea of just landscape, a lot of architects talk about the qualities of natural light. They're concerned with how you can shape it and use the quality there to evoke certain qualities architecturally. And the idea that that's actually the sun, that's nature, that's landscape too. And so how you work out the arrival at the building, your movement through it, it's all kind of an integrated thing. Any other questions?
Well, I think we're right at time, and thank you so much for great questions. Thank you so much, Bill. A round of applause. That was wonderful. And we will see you all next week. And thank you again. This was a great first talk for this series. So have a wonderful night. Take care.